Hello and welcome back to the KCC channel. I'm Rob and I hope you are having a wonderful day today. Today I have 4 stories for you from the Malicious Compliance subreddit. Before we start, how about a little bit of listener interaction today? Comment down below where you're listening or watching from. We have viewers and listeners from all around the world and I'd love to know where you in particular are from. Alright, on to the stories, let's jump right in. This story comes to us from MotorMania85. I wasted 2 hours of my sister's time because she refused to listen to me. When I was younger, around a decade ago, I used to love 2 things, cars and roads. Still to this day I love cars, but the way I loved roads was through maps. My favorite activity when I was bored was to go on the Maps app and look at the highways that surrounded my area. My oldest sister at the time was the only sibling of mine who had a license. One summer day, she was bored and decided to take me and her boyfriend to an amusement park an hour and a half away from home. The story begins on the way back. My father needed the car at the car dealership as it was scheduled to have routine maintenance done the next morning. My father sent her the address of the dealership and requested that she drop the car off and he will go and pick us up at the dealer. Now that the context is out of the way, here is where my sister made a mistake. She typed in the address and clicked on the nearest place with that road. The issue is that the nearest place with that road was a town going an hour in the opposite direction. She gets onto a road I will call State Route 100. This intersects with Interstate 1, which we were supposed to get onto. When she passes the highway, this following interaction ensues. You're supposed to make that right. That's not what the map says. 5 minutes later, I say again, we're heading in the wrong direction. This does not go home. Maybe it's an alternate route that's faster. I don't think a road going in the opposite direction is faster. She cuts me off. Her now annoyed. Listen, I'm gonna focus on what the map says, not on you. Just stop already. And with that, I followed her instruction. After all, why would I complain on going on a road I've never been on? From what I remember after that, we stopped for gas about half an hour in. My sister was still convinced we were going in the right direction. But why should I correct her? She is listening to the map after all. The fallout. We hit an expressway and my sister is convinced we made it home and is pleased with herself. This was until an overhead sign said, Town B Regional Airport 1 mile. At this point, my sister realized her mistake. She starts freaking out and saying, I didn't know this road went here. I was following the map. OP, why didn't you tell me we were going the wrong way? I was scared of her getting mad at me, so I just said, after you told me to stop, I just stopped paying attention to where you were going. She eventually pulled into a gas station and saw where she set her GPS to. After correcting her mistake, we head the opposite direction, although the car ride was rather silent. We eventually see signs for the amusement park we started at because she had to turn left at the road I originally told her to turn at. And that is how I turned a drive supposed to be an hour and a half into 3.5 hour journey. Years have passed since this happened, and I told my father, who thought it was hysterical. I often consider telling my sister, but we sadly rarely speak anymore. Thank you for reading. Have a happy new year. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, there's one from a user called Blue Veritas 731. It says, if this anecdote is representative of the norm, I'd say it's pretty obvious why the two of you rarely speak. And I'd venture that while it may make you sad, it also makes your life more peaceful. I'm not too sure about that one myself. I mean, OP was being taken to a theme park by this person. If they weren't getting along and arguing at the time, I have a feeling the sister wouldn't be taking OP to a theme park. OP just was told to be quiet and OP decided, yep, I'm gonna be quiet. We have absolutely no context as to why they don't talk to each other now. There could be lots of other stories between this one and present time that we just don't know. So I can't agree with this comment because, well, we just don't have enough information. This story comes to us from Abolish Blankets, Failed Malicious Compliance. Background to this, my mother is a terrible driver, gets very distracted, has had many accidents. I'd have been in my late teens when this happened. We took our weekly spin to the grandparents' house in a village about an hour's drive outside the city. It had been a few years since I'd been in the car with her. I chose to live with my dad a few years prior, so my tolerance to her driving had dropped significantly. Several times as we drove out of the city, she had either run red lights, turned from the wrong lane, or stayed sitting at the lights after they had changed to green cause she wasn't paying attention. After I said something or squeaked in fear 3 or 4 times, I was firmly told to shut up and not say another word about her driving. So I gripped the sides of my seat cushion and gritted my teeth and tried to come to terms with my mortality. About 20 kilometers out of town on a long straight road my mother has driven literally 1,000 times before, there were some unexpected roadworks in the distance. Couple of kilometers down the road, full visibility, minimal traffic, one tiny red car stopped at the lights which are red in the distance. I glance over and she's looking out the side window, communing with the clouds, cause that's what she does. Not to worry, she'll eventually have to look at the road, right? Right? You don't know my mother. Now we're a kilometer away, lights are still red, car is still there and not so tiny. 800 meters, 500 meters, she's still looking out the side window, thinking deep cloud related thoughts. Still doing 80. I'm frankly petrified at this point, cause my desire for malicious compliance is warring with my desire to live, and we're still doing 80, and the not very small at all red car is still stopped at the red light. At about 200 meters out, my will to live wins out, and I scream, "Stop!" She slams on the brakes, and a split second of anger rolls off her before she wakes the F up, and we skid, sliding forwards helplessly. I feel like I can see the eyes of the guy in front in his rearview mirror looking at us with horror. Some trauma bonding, I'm sure. Our car comes to a stop with only the slightest of crunching sounds. I think we must have shaved years off of his life. The aftermath was a lot of screaming from him, hysterical laughing from me, which did not help at all. I don't remember anything after that, a common side effect of dealing with my mother. So that is my failed malicious compliance. Please forgive me. I hope it still fits in this sub. Opie added a quick edit at the bottom of this one. It says, "Edit, for all the worried people out there, this was 3 decades ago, and she has gone from being very blasé and fast to very paranoid and slow, and only drives the local shops now." Jumping down to the comment section on this one, we have one from a user called Sofa. Yeah, we'll stop there. It says, "Effing terrifying that we might share roads with your mom." OP responded to this one and said, "Yep, for sure. I moved to a different country." This story totally reminds me of when I was a kid driving around with my grandmother in her big old Buick. And oh my gosh, this woman couldn't go into a parking spot and actually park the car without bumping another car. Every freaking time. I was just a little kid, so I couldn't report it or anything like that. But I do recall many times pulling into parking spots and seeing the car on the other side do a little bit of a jolt. And she never told anybody. Oh my. She's long gone now, but that's a fond memory from when I was a little kid. This story comes to us from Mango Physical 1308. Don't bother you anymore? Fine, I won't. I used to live in an apartment building that had shops on the main level. The building next door was the same. The 2 buildings shared a wall. My building had assigned parking and yellow paper notes to put in our car windows. A restaurant opened up in the building next door. Their owner, manager, and staff began parking in my spot, as well as our neighbors. I spoke to the owner and she said she would talk to them again, but didn't think it would help. They were even parking in her spot. Every night I would get home, call them, and ask that the vehicle be moved. I was getting tired of this. When one night they put the manager on because they were busy and didn't have time to deal with my request. He did do it, but told me they wouldn't do it again, and I was to stop calling them. I suggested they stop parking in my assigned spot. He told me he had too many staff to control where they parked, and he was sure they were not parking in my spot and it was probably a customer. You know, because customers always park behind a business and then walk around to the front to get in. The next time I worked evening shifts. I got home and this time there was a Range Rover parked in my spot. I dutifully called the tow truck and not the restaurant. I had to wait for a second tow truck because the first one was not equipped to move a vehicle of that type. Something about being jacked up and stuff. They explained it, and the wait was because I didn't know enough to be able to answer their questions about the truck, so they could send out the right truck first. They towed it, and I went in and went to bed. A few hours later, I was awakened by a phone call from the towing company. I had towed the owner, and he was telling them that it was his parking spot and that I had no right to tow him. They were going to bill me for the tow. I told the caller about my landlord's parking permits, the numerous phone calls to have them move, about being told not to bother them anymore, and that his restaurant was in the next building with a separate parking lot. We said goodbye, and I never heard anything more about it. I was also able to park in my spot after. I told my neighbor, and he told me just to be safe, I should tell the owner of the other building. I popped into her shop and told her. She replied with something to the effect of, "You towed the Range Rover?" I said yes. She started to laugh and basically said, "Good for you," and told me it was the restaurant owner's truck. Still makes me smile when I think of it. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, there's one from a user called Navy Shooter NS. It says, "Nicely done. It's a shame folks don't listen until there's an actual real cost and result that hits them." Another commenter called Sexy Squid 89 said, "When they say there's nothing they can do, if it costs them money all of a sudden, there's lots they can do." OP just happened to get lucky that it was the owner's vehicle parked there this time, and this is the time that he decided to have them towed. I think after the first couple of times, I probably would have started the towing then, and not waiting and calling them every night. That's just not something that you really have to do. If it's your parking spot and you've given them warning, call the tow truck. Let them deal with it. This story comes to us from Royal Librarian 4201. Well, if you are quoting company rules, I'll follow them exactly as it is. This was done by an ex-colleague. Well, this happened a few years ago when I was working as a techno manager in an Indian startup IT firm. It was a small firm with less than 50 employees, and there were two founders. Let's call them Vicky and Joel. Vicky had worked a short time in an MNC, but was not able to stand authority and had to resign, whereas Joel had no real workplace experience. Vicky managed the place like a king, show tantrums, anger, etc. Joel was simply a yes man to Vicky. Now, we had an HR lady who was okay-ish with the older employees and strict with the newer ones. As for me, I was not that good technically compared to my colleagues, but was good at people management. Also, I was one of the longest serving employees too. I was friendly with most of the employees, especially the new ones. This was due to the fact that I knew it was not easy to work with the founders, and I wanted the show to continue as it was my first company too. So a new joinee named Bob joins, and after 6 months, he is assigned to a project. Because of the time zone difference, he worked up to 4 to 5 a.m., and the client too was happy with him. Since he was sleeping late, this guy always reported at nearly 11:30 a.m. in office. Out of the blue, founder calls me and HR asks why Bob is late to the office and said he has to be in by 10 a.m. as the other guys. By the way, forgot to mention, Vicky and Joel came into office only once in a while, and it was pre-corona times, but since they are founders, let's ignore that. HR lady took the responsibility of asking Bob about that. At this point, since HR lady is not aware of Bob's working hours, I interrupted and told that he's leaving the office by only 2 to 4 a.m., and it's kind of unfair to ask him to come early. Vicky cut me off and says, "No, he has to follow rules, and this is the basic etiquette when working in this office." I said, "Okay." HR lady calls Bob in her office and questions him about the timings, to which Bob says, "Okay ma'am, we'll comply." Now, Bob and me have a good rapport, and he comes directly to me and tells me what happened with HR. Then I ask him, "What are you going to do?" To which he says, "I will ask for a clarification via mail and then will comply." I understood where it's going and give him a best of luck, trying hard to contain my laughter. After 10 minutes, HR comes to me with their laptop in a panic and shows me the mail which Bob has sent. He has CC'd the founders, the client head he's reporting to, and have written something along the lines of, "Hi client head name, this is to inform you that as a request from my office to comply to the office timing, from tomorrow onwards, my work timings will be 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. That's 10:30 p.m. to 7:30 a.m. Chicago time. I request you to change your meeting times to the times when I am available, and if any inconveniences, please contact HR, Vicky, or Joel. Thanks, Bob." I asked HR if this was somewhere mentioned in the offer letter, and she nods yes. Then I tell her to take the matter to Vicky. At Vicky's room, since the narcissist guy he is, scolds HR for not noting this in the offer letter, then asks her to correct this. She goes to Bob and asks for correction, to which Bob firmly says no. HR lady, being stupid, tells that she told this because Vicky asked her to, and Bob still stands firm and asks HR if Vicky have said it, then ask Vicky to formally reply in the mail thread asking to revert to old timings. Bob also says that he's not going to get back to old timings unless Vicky mails, and they have approximately 4 hours to do so before the client reacts. HR comes to me for help and we go together to Vicky's room and brief. Vicky lashes out at HR, and at this point, I interrupt and say, it's better to address the issue, as in 4 hours client will get involved and we have to take a decision before that. Vicky hesitantly sent out the mail, saying it was a mistake as Bob's special case was not considered during the decision making, and Bob can continue his earlier timings. As I walked back to office, I saw Bob looking at me and laughing really hard, and I had to hold a straight face as HR lady was also behind me. Needless to say, Bob has his timings intact. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, there's one from a user called Louis Dom. It says, "These little power trips sometimes backfire, do they? It's hilarious how some people can't be bothered to ask a little question before disrupting someone's work. And I'm very grateful to have never encountered this level of butt-effery." I think we can go back to a comment that I've made in previous videos where I said, if somebody's asking you to get something in writing, you should probably review what you just asked them to do or told them to do, because they want proof. That means you've probably done something wrong and should be looking into what you did. Did anybody else notice they said this guy was clocking in around 11:30 a.m. but not leaving until 2 to 4 in the morning? This guy's working like what, 14 hours a day? What the heck is wrong with this guy?